Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Manmouth, along with my longtime colleague, George Eichhorn of the Detroit Monitor. And George, glad to have you on. I wish I could have you under better circumstances, but we're paying tribute to Mr. Tiger, Al Kaline, tonight. So, George, what are your thoughts about the sudden passing of Al Kaline?
Well, first of all, thank you, Scott, for having me on as your guest. He'll always be remembered as Mr. Tiger. I mean, just like Ernie Banks was Mr. Cub, of course, Kaline, number 6 in our hearts and in our program. What a great life from 1934 to 2020. Al Kaline, what a legend, and just a class gentleman, as you know, on and off the field, Scott. We both had the opportunity to talk to him and interview him, and he just was a cut above, I would say, the normal baseball player, because he just loved the game so much and was so passionate about it, too.
Yeah, he sure really was, wasn't he? You're talking about a player who went out there, played 22 seasons in a row with one team, which is a rare feat these days. And the way he handles himself with class and dignity, to me, goes beyond my wildest of imagination. I had the good fortune of meeting him twice, thankfully at Tiger Town in Lakeland at Joker Marchant Stadium, and did do an interview with him one time, and then I shook his hand another time, and it was just a privilege and an honor to be able to do something like that. It really, really was. So, unbelievable. But
yeah, he definitely stood above everybody, and but again, he wasn't an egotist. Okay, he wasn't the kind of guy, Al Kaline, who would go around and brag about this or brag about that or boast about that home run he hit and all that. In fact, our friend Jerry Green wrote a column recently about Al and said the fact that a couple of things that Jerry remembered, like way back in the 50s, and he said something to Kaline about it, and Al said, I don't remember that, you know. And it's just like, you know, he just like went to work every day like a ball player that's just committed to, you know, doing his best job for his team and his lineup. And that was the kind of guy Kaline was, such a pro and so talented in all these different aspects of the game. As you know, Scott, you know, Kaline was just such a great ball player. And I just really, really admired him and of course, grew up with him here in Detroit. And he was just kind of like one of my boyhood heroes.
Yeah, you and everybody else, mine too. I mean, when you think about everything in general, though, I mean, we had an opportunity not only to see him on the field, but his heroics in the 1968 World Series in Game 6 that led the Tigers to a 13-1 win over the Cardinals, only for Mickey Lolich to finish off the Cardinals in Game 7. Those are two of the most unbelievable players in history. And I'll get into some of the history about icons in Detroit in a moment, but when you look at the fact that not only was Kaline such a great player, but he was a great announcer paired with George Kell. Think about it. You have two Hall of Fame players who are really pretty good announcers educating the fan base. That was a treat that George Kell and Al Kaline could be a broadcasting tandem. Mr. Tiger and, of course, George Kell, the guy from Arkansas. They were truly remarkable together.
Yeah, they were, Scott, and as you know, WDIV in Detroit, the NBC affiliate, carried most of those games, and, you know, he would get ribbed a little bit. Kaline would get ribbed in the media by some of the people that, you know, complained about maybe a word he mispronounced or something like that. But hey, I never got into that kind of criticism because, like you said, he was in the booth with a great pro, George Kell, who made a great transition in his own right from player, third base, all-star, to the broadcast booth. Of course, working with our friend Ernie Harwell for a while, George Kell, and then taking over the TV job in Detroit for a long, long time. But yeah, they were a great combination. They played off each other well, and you know, like I said, Kaline wasn't the polished broadcaster, but boy, the insight he gave into the game. It's a lot like Kurt Gibson gives the insight right now on the Detroit broadcast, because Kurt, of course, was a player and a manager and a coach. So, but Kaline is, you know, he made it a little rocky at start, you know, going into the broadcast booth, but like you said, he and Tell were just a great combination.
Yeah, they sure were. I mean, when you look at Al Kaline in general, these numbers are staggering, so we'll just take them one at a time. That Al Kaline is one of 7 players to get 3,000 hits and 1,500 RBIs with one franchise. That's item number 1. He gets his 3,000th hit off Dave McNally of the Baltimore Orioles, and you're talking against the Baltimore Orioles, and he was born in Baltimore. Unreal, and that 10 gold gloves.
Yeah.
10 gold gloves.
And he you're right. It was ironic when he got that 3,000 hit that it was a double off McNally, and I'll never forget the film footage that they showed later on after the inning was completed. He went over to the box seats, and there was sitting his mom, his dad, American League President Lee McPhail, and Detroit General Manager Jim Campbell. And what a great shot that was of Al hugging his mom and dad, and then, of course, shaking hands with McPhail and with Campbell. But you're right, quite ironic and quite fitting for the kid from Baltimore, Kaline, who came into the big leagues, when he was like 19 years old, getting his 3,000 hit right there in his hometown.
Yeah, that was definitely a well-written script, wasn't it? And when you talk about his other accomplishments, 18 All-Star games, the 10th player at that time to be voted in the first year in the Hall of Fame at 88.3%. And here's a very staggering number, okay? 67 years with one organization, and he's the first Tiger to sign for $100,000 back in 1971. And on today's, just so you know what that translates to today's money, $631,306.
Yeah, and you know what, Scott, you and I probably remember the story too, that Jim Campbell, the general manager, who was a tough as nails kind of guy, as you and I know, he offered Kaline 1 year a raise to get him up to $100,000, and Al said, "You know what, Mr. Campbell, I'm not worth it. I'm not worth it. Keep your money, keep your raise." True story. And then, of course, he went out and proved it on the field. I don't remember what year of his career this was, but and then the following year, of course, he went, like you said, over 100,000. But yeah, and compared to today's talent and today's dollars, oh my gosh, it was quite a steal for Jim Campbell and the Tigers to have this guy play for them for $100,000, wasn't it?
Oh, wasn't it? Oh yeah, without a doubt. And I know we talked about him being an announcer on WDIV. I'm not one to try to get overly critical about what a guy does, especially when he comes from the playing field to the broadcast booth. There's a period of adjustment you have to get used to not only a partner, but you have to get to producers and the criticism. But the way he patrolled Tiger Stadium in right field, to me, was just truly remarkable.
Yeah, and I'd like to make a correction to something I said earlier. Kaline broke in not at age 19, but at age 18. Of course, going right from the sandlots, as they say in Baltimore, to signing his contract with scout Ed Catalinas of the Detroit Tigers. And so I did want to make that correction to your
that's
listeners.
All right.
But yeah, Kaline was unbelievable. Scott, you and I know it. That rocket of an arm he had. I mean, he would make catches in right field that make these guys look like little leaguers nowadays. The way Kaline patrolled that corner at Briggs Stadium, later to be called Tiger Stadium. And the fact that he would throw these guys out and hit the relay man, the cutoff guy, and he just had a rocket of an arm, like you said, and his defensive skills were, like you said, with all those gold gloves that he won, he was just dynamic out there in right field.
Well, when you think about the fact that he has a statue at Comerica Park for defensive, what does that tell you? How many times do you have a defensive statue at Comerica Park?
Yes, and for those of you that are listening, what Scott's referring to is the bronze statue that Mr. Ilitch had specially made with Kaline, and he's leaping. His arm is way up over his head, and his mitt is there, and he's ready to catch that ball right into his glove. And that, like Scott just described, is a statue of Kaline. And you're right. I mean, normally, of course, the man hit 399 home runs and all the RBIs that you mentioned and his 3,000 hits. But no, the Ilitches made a great decision and realized that Kaline's defense was such a great part of his career. And like you said, did that statue with him in a fielding position.
Well, I had once asked Al Kaline whether or not he regrets not getting that 400th, and he admitted to me, yeah, I guess that's probably one move I should have made, but he wasn't one of those types of people that was going to dwell on it. But he gave me that look, said, yeah, it probably wasn't a bad idea to be in the 400 club in 3,000, but didn't prevent him from getting in the Hall of Fame because he's not only a Hall of Fame player but a Hall of Fame person. So,
absolutely, Scott. And the funny thing is that he would have been at 400 if it not been for a rainout. In the 1950s, the Tigers were playing a game, and I'm not sure who the opponent was, but obviously it started raining during the game. Kaline had hit a home run, but they never got in the 4.5 innings, so all the records from that game were, of course, wiped out. And Kaline had a home run in that game,
really?
And that was earlier in his career in the 50s. But again, our friend Jerry Green pointed that out in his column that he wrote, especially for the Detroit News. But you're right. Kaline is just, he wasn't all worked up about statistics. I'm sure that 3,000 hit, of course, like you and I said, was special because it was in his hometown especially. But, Al he's just so steady, went out there, such a professional, pick up his glove every day, give his all every game, day in and day out. He was one of those guys that could hit with power. He could hit for average. He could field. He could run. I mean, you don't see those kind of players every day. We don't see that kind of stuff back in the day when we fought with guys like Mickey Mantle or Roberto Clemente or Willie Mays, people like that, which obviously Kaline is in that class.
Oh, yeah, well, without a doubt. I mean, Al Kaline, to me, won the Roberto Clemente Award, I think, for best sportsmanship. So when you look at the fact that Roberto Clemente Award is handed to best sportsmanship, then Al was deserving of every honor that he ended up getting. I'm glad that he's one of those players that did not go ahead and go championship-less, that has a championship. And when you talk about Mayo Smith making that bold move in the World Series when he had Mickey Stanley play shortstop and Al Kaline to get in the lineup, what does that tell you?
Yeah, you're right, Scott. That was a bold move, of course. That was something that Mayo Smith had in the back of his mind. And if your listeners aren't familiar with that, Kaline was hurt for a chunk of the 1968 season. In fact, he was also hurt in the 67 season, which the Tigers missed out by just an eyelash of winning the American League pennant that year. But in 68, when they did win it, Mickey Stanley, I mean, you're talking about a great outfielder, a great center fielder, had to be moved to shortstop. But they had a weak hitting guy, but a good fielder named Ray Euler,
right,
who was benched for the World Series. And then, of course, like you said, Stanley shifted to short. And then Northrup moved from right field to center field. And then Kaline got his right field position back. And just a stroke of genius by Mayo Smith, a man who doesn't have, a whole lot of credit given to him. He's kind of an unknown kind of manager, but he certainly pulled off a winner when like you said, he got Kaline into the World Series in 1968.
Well, some of your best managers are the ones that have a bag of tricks and they use it, and they're not afraid to go ahead and use it. So when we talk about icons in Detroit, Gordie Howe, I remember how the area mourned Gordie Howe, of course, rightfully so, legendary, and I think now you can put Al Kaline. I knew that when Gordie Howe passed on, I said the next sad day will be when Al Kaline dies. Indeed, he did exactly that. But I guess the number one Tiger that, in my opinion, will always stand out will be Ernie Harwell. And maybe I'm a little selfish in this because Ernie Harwell, to me, was the type of person that treated me, well, I called him Uncle Ernie Harwell, so you know how close Ernie Harwell and I were. Anyhow, spent tons of time with him, had his number. We did everything together, especially when we were on the road. No disrespect to Al Kaline, but Ernie Harwell, to me, will always be the number one Tiger in my eyes because of the relationship we had. Enjoyed some good times with Gordie Howe when I saw him. Mickey Lolich, I enjoyed the opportunity to bring him on the Sports Exchange and WEI Network. Spent time with him at his home with his wife Joyce, and they treated me really, really good. So, when I look at Al Kaline, Mickey Lolich, Gordie Howe, and Ernie Harwell, that goes without saying. So that leads me to my next point, George. When you talk about deaths of this magnitude, I often wonder what, we've seen a few already this year with Kobe Bryant dying, but I look at Los Angeles when you have Vin Scully. What's going to happen in Southern California when something ultimately happens to Vin Scully? And then you also...
Well, yeah, and then don't forget Tommy Lasorda.
Right, I was about to say that. Vin Scully,
yeah.
You have Tommy Lasorda, and then you also have here in Miami, what about Don Shula?
Oh, yeah, that's another one. Yeah, I mean, those guys are just like cemented in gold as far as their name goes and their contributions to their sports. And it is difficult, Scott. Like you said, when we lose somebody like that, Ernie Harwell, and now you and I have lived through, saying goodbye to Ernie and saying goodbye to Gordie Howe and Ted Lindsay and now Al Kaline. And these are people we look up to. The other two that I got to add to your list that I looked up to, of course, was Dave Bing. And Dave Bing, what a fabulous, I always think of him as Mr. Piston, Dave Bing. And then the other one, of course, is Joe Schmidt. And again, I knew Joe not so much as a player, but as a really good coach who really got shafted when he was fired by Russ Thomas of the Lions. But Joe Schmidt, of course, a Hall of Famer, still alive. And that's another one that Detroit is really going to feel the hurt when the good Lord calls Joe. But getting back to yours, oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, when we lost Dick Enberg, remember a couple of years ago, Scott? We lost Dick Enberg.
Yeah.
Well, a Michigan guy, but then a South California guy, really, for his majority of his life, but he was born in Michigan.
Right, yeah, I remember Dick Enberg. I think the thing when I look at some of these other icons, though, I mean, you're talking about Hall of Fame icons. Gordie Howe, you don't get any bigger than that. You really don't. Than Al Kaline. I mean, these guys are just, they're beyond anybody's comprehension. Of course, Vince Scully, Ernie Harwell. I mean, these guys here, you identify a team with them, and Don Shula. I mean, these are some real heavy hitters. I'm not downplaying Dave Bing because obviously he meant more to that city, not only what he did on the basketball court, but as a mayor of that town. Joe Schmidt, without a doubt, got shafted. Then again, Russ Thomas shafted a lot of people anyhow, so that goes without saying. So, but I think I don't acknowledge Bing and Schmidt as much as you do because I was relatively young when those guys were doing. I could appreciate their accolades of what they were doing because I understood what they had done. But to me, the other ones certainly stand out. Vince Scully. I can only bear what's going to happen in Southern California when Vinny passes on. All heard about the outlie with Kobe Bryant, but I think it's going to be far worse with Vince Scully than it will be Kobe Bryant. I really do. Tommy Lasorda, I'm sure it would be a tough situation there. I don't know whether Sparky Anderson is revered as he should have been, only because you connected with Cincinnati as well as the Tigers. It took them a while before they went ahead and retired Sparky's number. Yeah. But these are all big names, and I'm glad you brought up Jerry Green.
Yeah, and they were big names, and they continue to be big names. And, I mean, sports has its legends, and it has its names, and of course Michael Jordan, of course he's much younger, but when you come down to and I'm sure every city can come up with one or two of them that really cross that line, like you said, into the legend category and to meaning so much to their city. But that's what sports is all about. It's all about. And Kaline, they said he was suffering the last year or so. I mean, he's had a couple of health issues, and his passing was due to a stroke, from what we're hearing, and it's just sudden. It's too sudden for so many of us because nobody knew that he was ailing. I mean, there were a few people, I guess, probably that were around the press box that said he didn't look the same like maybe the last year or so. But you got to remember, think about all these years that man was out in the sun, and he had skin like leather. But once in a while, Scott, you know how that's going to catch up with you. I always thought that he might get the cancer of the skin that might do him in more than anything, only because he spent so much time in Lakeland, on the field, and he loved golf. Kaline, whenever he got a chance to golf, I know he golfed in many charity golf outings here in Michigan, and if I thought anything would do him in, I was fearful, just not wishing, of course, but fearful that it would be the skin cancer because, like I said, he just looked, his complexion the last couple of years looks really, really what they call ruddy, R-U-D-D-Y. And it's no knock on Al, but I was concerned because I would see him and I would see how much he's aged, knowing his face and all that.
Right.
But, he's gone. It didn't matter, I guess, to anybody other than the family, how he went. But I'm just saying that I know that even the sun will take its toll on somebody after a while if you've been out there that much with or without sun protection. But Al, he stood the test of time, though. Come on. He had a great life, 85 years old, and, like I said, starting in the big leagues when he was only 18. And then he winning the batting title, Scott. Winning the batting title at age 20 in 1955. Think of that.
Yeah.
I mean, how strange and how rare that is.
Right.
But no, he was definitely Mr. Tiger.
Yeah, when we talk about Al Kaline, and I've covered a lot of spring training. I never had clubhouse privileges that much, except occasionally. So that made it hard for me to come in contact with Al there. It really was. I would catch him every now and then if he were out accessible beyond the clubhouse, which I feel in some respect I would have had it, but you can't dwell on it. It just wasn't meant to be, and they probably limited the clubhouse to just some of the daily beat writers instead of some of the auxiliary people. But but we also have to understand that as journalists, we can't go ahead and get photos done freely. You have to be smart if you're lucky, or unless your photographer takes a photo of you, then it's not so obvious. So, I'm not going to lose my press credentials over taking a chance that I would probably regret. And I think a lot of people have to know what the ethics in journalism are like to realize you're there for exactly a purpose, and anything above and beyond that goes without saying. So, you've been around the Tigers a lot more on a daily basis. Did you see him around much, or is he pretty invisible for the most part?
Well, Scott, he was in the press box, of course. He used to sit with Dave Dombrowski when Dave was the president and CEO and general manager of the club. Dave had some wonderful things to say about Al today from his home, and they had a great friendship, Dave Dombrowski and Al Kaline, and of course Al was what they call a special assistant to Dave. And then, of course, when Dave was let go by the Tigers a couple of years ago, Al Avila, of course, kept that connection strong, and I don't know exactly what Al did, to be honest with you, other than to help out in Lakeland, which was important, and to meet the players. And he was in the press box, but he would, you'd see him a little bit, not a whole lot. Let's say he was going to grab a coffee or a soda pop. We'd see him, pop in and out of the media lounge for something like that. He didn't talk like a lot to people in the press box. He would just get his drink, like, let's say, and go back to his booth. He usually sat with either Dombrowski or Avila in their private box in the Comerica Park press box. Other than that, I know they used him a little bit in the community when he was available, like I said, for charity purposes. But he wasn't one that would go down like some of the players from '68, as you know. They had and from '84, the Tigers championship in '84. They would have this fantasy camp, as it's called, down in Lakeland, Florida. And Al, I think, went a few times, but not nearly as much as guys like Dave Rosema and Jim Price and some of the other Tigers went down there quite a bit. But like I said, Al's role, I probably was lessened in the last few years with, due to his age. But I know that he did give valuable insight, like I said, to Dombrowski, and I'm sure to Al Avila as well.
Well, yeah, when you're a special assistant and you have a Hall of Fame person as well as a player, who in their right mind would not want to go ahead and draw from his expertise? I know Jim Leland and him were very close friends, and Al would go into the manager's house, from what I read, and Jim would vent. Al never raised his voice, from what I heard, and obviously Leland was a sponge who would take any pointers that he can get. And as a result, why not if you had that source right in front of you? So, I mean, so let's talk about the Metro Detroit area. I know this one's going to sting for a long while, as it did with Harwell, as it did with Howe, and now Kaline.
It sure is. And the unfortunate thing is, Scott, is the fact that with the coronavirus right now, we can't have a proper farewell to Al in the sense of, perhaps viewing his body at Comerica Park or whatever the family would have worked or liked to work out with the Tigers. Obviously, that won't happen, but I'm sure there'll be a fitting memorial for him once things are, the state of emergency is lifted and things are settled down. It's just that we won't be able to, to see him either lying in state, if you will. But that's okay. I mean, I'm sure that there's going to be some sort of, I'm not sure. I should correct myself. I hope there's going to be some sort of public memorial or public ceremony that Tiger fans can participate in, because as you know, with Ernie Harwell and with Gordie Howe and with Mr. Ilitch, Mike Ilitch, the owner, his was held at the Fox Theater. They had people had a chance to pay their respects, and I believe for Ted Lindsay they did too. So Detroit likes that, because as you know, with being such a great sports town, Detroit just they hold their players in such high esteem. Once you win over the fans, so to speak, and it's the same with the Pistons. I mean, you got Dave Bing, you got Isaiah Thomas, and maybe Bob Lanier to a certain extent, or Vinnie Johnson, Joe Dumars. I mean, there have been some Pistons that are held high. Lions, not so much, other than Joe Schmidt and maybe, of course, Barry Sanders. I shouldn't forget, and Billy Sims. But every town has its own heroes. But Detroit, being the lunch bucket working town, blue collar town,
right?
I think they really identify with these guys who give it all, day in and day out, game in and game out. And that was certainly Kaline's mantra.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up each of those four. You had Lindsay, you had Ilitch, you had Howe, and Ernie Harwell, of course. That they were able to see them, and pay respect for them in the manner that they did. And I was hoping we would see something like that with Kaline, but obviously the way things are with COVID-19, it is a shame. But, I don't have to be biased towards Detroit, knowing what a great sports town it is, but I lived there, born and raised there. I saw those fans, and I can say that in an objective sense, because I've been to other sports towns around the country, having traveled a lot more. And I'll tell you what, there's nothing like a great Midwestern fan base that, views your accomplishments as sacred. And Detroit definitely does pay tribute to their heroes. So, this is going to stink for a long, long time. What is some of the other reaction among some of the writers and the media members out there? I know Mitch Albom had some interesting things to say. And what are things like on television? I mean, imagine they're eating this story up all day long too, aren't they? The local stations as well as radio.
Yeah, they are. They put up together some nice. Dan Miller of the Fox affiliate, Bernie Smilovitz of the NBC affiliate, Brad Galley of the ABC affiliate. All of them have done nice features. Most people are obviously. It's like a loss impossible to describe, as our friend John Nile of Detroit News said, a loss impossible to describe. And it just is, and like you and I were talking earlier, it's just the fact that, he did look a little aged and peaked a little bit the last year, but nobody expected to hear this news all of a sudden, kind of like out of the dark. And you know, one of the things you mentioned earlier about the Hall of Fame, what I liked about it, I tell you what, Al and George Kell, most people don't know this, but when they were broadcasting together, they would take turns going to the Hall of Fame. So if it was Al Kaline's turn to go to the induction ceremony, he would take off the broadcast and go. If it was Kell, then they would alternate. The next year, George Kell would go. The Hall of Fame meant something to these guys, and they wanted to go back and welcome the new class every year. And Johnny Bench had a great compliment I saw on Twitter. And Justin Verlander and Matthew Boyd, the Tigers' current pitching ace, all of these guys saluted, you know, calling him Mr. Kaline or Mr. K. James McCann, the former Tiger catcher, he had a wonderful tribute today. So, you know, it's everybody, to a player, to a fan, to a media member, everybody respected Al, and certainly Kaline was his legacy was out there for everybody to see. So to answer your question, yeah, there have been a lot of tributes, local media, and like I said, the former players that worked with him, and you mentioned Jim Leyland, all the guys that managed and stuff like that. People had a lot of respect for Kaline, of course.
Well, one of the shows I watch on ESPN is Golick and Wingo in the morning. I actually draw up that show to try to get ideas for what we do here on the network, and they were able to slide it in neatly when they had Buster Olney on there. And Golick and Wingo made it a point that, you know, Buster, why don't you educate basically the new generation about Al Kaline? And the way that segue turned out with Mike Golick and Trey Wingo was fantastic, the way they just transitioned to it that well, you know, and because a lot of the younger millennials don't know anything about the older players that made this game what it is. They really don't, and it's a shame that they don't. I remember a long time ago, I think I told you a story when I was covering a Tampa Bay Rays game and the Tigers in St. Petersburg at Tropicana Field, and I asked Mike Marath one time if he knew anything about Mickey Lolich, and he didn't. And then Troy Percival, who was on the team at the time, said, "What? You don't know anything about him?" And these players just don't know the history of the game. They just simply don't. And
no, that's a good point. Yeah,
and I never was able to watch a lot of the other shows because I was so busy lining up guests for future broadcasts. But the one I like the most of the group, anyways, is Golick and Wingo. I'm glad that Kaline at least made that show. The other ones, to me, are what they are, but that's the one that I try to model what we're doing here and draw the most ideas in different ways that we can convey our message. Just so you know, folks, you're listening to the South Florida Tribune Broadcasting Network, 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. My name is Scott Morganroth, and with my guest co-host, George Eichhorn. And George and I have known each other for the better part of 41 years, worked together with the Detroit Monitor, members of Detroit Sports Broadcaster Association, now changed over to Detroit Sports Media. And George and I have worked on so many projects, we wouldn't have enough airtime to even scratch the surface on them. So, but this is an opportunity to pay tribute to a guy who was definitely worth the Mount Rushmore. All right, that's an interesting point. If you had to look at the Mount Rushmore of Detroit Tigers, who would your four be?
Well, of course, you'll know two of them, Ernie Harwell, Al Kaline, and then the next two I'm going to have to go with Ty Cobb and Alan Trammell. Those are going to be my four. What about you, Scott?
Well, I got to put Ty Cobb at the top for sure. And Ernie Harwell, Al Kaline. I could go Hank Greenberg on that.
Yeah, well, that's a great choice. Tell me more, because you don't have to tell me more, because Greenberg, of course, a fantastic Tiger and Hall of Famer, first baseman. Yeah, and of course he even served in, I believe, in World War II. Did he not miss a year or two because of the war?
Exactly. And, you're talking, a guy who paved the way for some of the best Jewish players to ever go ahead and make it to the big leagues, too. And, I think if I had to give an honorable mention, I would put Mickey Lolich in that group. Here's a guy that was an innings eater is what he was. Miguel Cabrera eventually could make a case with the newer generation, but unfortunately his performance the last couple of years due to injuries hasn't helped his cause. But yeah, when you're dealing with one of the original,
of course, and don't forget the mechanical man, second baseman Charlie Gehringer. What a great career Gehringer had. In fact, they retired Gehringer and Greenberg's numbers not until after they did Al Kaline's. Al Kaline was the first one to have his Tiger number retired, number 6, and I was there. Me and a couple of my buddies from high school, we bought tickets, and we were in the first row, I believe, near the Tiger bullpen. As you remember, Scott, at Tiger Stadium, way down the left field line, the Tiger bullpen was. And Al and his wife, Louise, were driven around the outfield and all around the stadium in a beautiful white, I believe it was a Chevrolet convertible. And what a moment that was when the place was just jammed. And, Mayor Gribbs and Governor Milliken was there, and American League President Joe Cronin was there. I mean, it was a big, big ceremony. And I was fortunate enough to have tickets to that game. I was close to the car as it went by and drove on the warning track, that convertible. And then Mel Torme, a little bit of trivia, Scott. Mel Torme, the famous singer, the famous song, Thanks for the Memories, and he wrote a special script for Al Kaline that the Tigers commissioned him to write a verse of that song, Thanks for the Memories, and Mel Torme sang it that day live on the field at Tiger Stadium. So a little bit of trivia there. That was back in the 1970s, and I still remember going to that game as a kid. And they gave us a little souvenir button, of course, that said Al Kaline Day, and they had a special program, commemorative program they made that day. So, I go back to the days when I was in high school, following him. And I just wanted to share that with you.
Well, I appreciate that. I think the best game that we ever covered together, baseball-wise, was the final game at Tiger Stadium. I mean, if I could freeze a game in time, then you and I were working it together. Of course, we did. My only opening day was in 1999, and we got that one done too. But the final game at Tiger Stadium, to me, if I could freeze one sporting event in time, I would definitely have to say that one. It was anticlimactic.
Oh my gosh! Yes, remember that as they brought the players back out to their old positions. They jogged in from center field. Remember, and of course, you're right. Kaline came out to patrol right field, and of course, this is obviously the big ceremony after the game, which Robert Fick had a beautiful home run. Obviously, that we'll never forget. You and I covering that game, and the Tigers gave the old gray lady, a wonderful send-off at Tiger Stadium. But you're right. Kaline was, of course, one of many, many great players that showed up for that game. And you and I were covering it, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it was just surreal. I mean, I can't think of a game. I mean, I've covered 4 Super Bowl games and a lot of other big events. But when you think of what that game meant, Ernie Harwell giving the final speech there, farewell, to me, it was just unreal. And yet, Ernie Harwell, I could never say enough. When he passed away, I mourned that one a long, long time. Because remember, I used to drive him around. When I covered road games for the Tigers, I would take Ernie back to his hotel room all the time or hotel, and we would do all kinds of stuff on the road. It was just unreal. And when you talk about the fiasco that happened with Ernie Harwell, when they let him go, and then Ilitch brought him back. You talk about a passionate sports town back in their heroes. I even told Ernie Harwell, I'll never see a Tiger game until they got your situation right, and thankfully Mike Ilitch knew he had to do that, but not taking the focus off of Al Kaline. Any Mount Rushmore of mine definitely has to start with Al Kaline and Ernie Harwell, and then of course you fill in the blanks with the other ones. But those are always and rightfully so. But to me tonight, our broadcast here, 108 Stitches Baseball Talk, is a celebration of Al Kaline. And he's a rare breed nowadays. Players don't start one place and finish at all either. I mean, now they move around money wise, and I understand that. But he's just, Al Kalines are so precious in so many ways that we wouldn't have enough words to describe what really.
Yeah.
It said, what about other reaction on the local news? Were there any particular tributes that stood out? And not only today, but also yesterday when the news broke, because the first time I actually saw it, believe it or not, was on Facebook, and then I waited for ESPN's ticker, and when I saw that, the first time I heard about Gordie Howe passing away was a Roy Allen Firestone, who I am Facebook friends with, who's known for his ESPN work in L.A., mentioned Gordie Howe, and then a former baseball teammate of mine, Mike Levin, actually, who I played in Southfield. I saw it from him, and then all of a sudden, I couldn't believe it. Then everything started to blow up on social media.
Yeah, well, of course, it was the top story on most of the newscasts yesterday in Detroit, and continues to be talked about. Actually, a guy that I was kind of surprised Channel 4, instead of one of their sports guys like Bernie Smilovitz, actually it was a newsman named Rod Maloney. And Rod Maloney covers the auto beat for Detroit and Channel 4 NBC here in Detroit. And he did a really good job. He put together some old footage of so many different highlights of Al's career, and including that 3,000th hit, including the 1968 World Series that you alluded to, his big hits in Game 5 and Game 6. And Rod Maloney did a really nice job. I saw his piece, and they let him show it, like I said, with a lot of video clips, which was very important to people that, like myself, you like to see the visual stuff. And, a lot of the younger generation, of course, they don't even know who Al Kaline is, unfortunately, but that's what you alluded to earlier when you said about, players like Michael Roth not even knowing Mickey Lolich. But I'm telling you, Kaline was different. He made an impression from, like I said, James McCann to Justin Verlander to Matthew Boyd, whoever he came in touch with. And it's kind of sad because, the 68 team, Scott, had their 50th reunion just 2 years ago in 2018. And so that was the 50th anniversary of that 68 team. And now, of course, the Giants, the biggest name of all, has passed on. And yes, we still have guys still around. We have Willie Horton and Mickey Stanley and Jim Price and, guys like Darrell Patterson, and Bill Freehan is hanging on there. I know Bill's been very sick with Alzheimer's disease.
Mickey Lolich, too. Mickey
Lolich and Denny McClain.
Right.
Yeah, can't forget Tom Matchik and John Ward, and there's a few others that are still around from that 68 team. But you think back to that reunion just 2 summers ago, and it was elaborate, because that's the way Mr. Ilitch is, as you know. It was elaborate. And what they gave each one of those players, that autographed framed jersey of the one they wore, and the other gifts that the Ilitches gave just 2 short years ago. Of course, Mr. had passed away, but it was just a great ceremony for that 68 team, and one that I won't forget, because I was there too when they honored the players at Comerica Park.
Yeah, I wish I would have been there for that, but I have to say, though, my dad told me, and I remember, I went to Game 3 of the 1968 World Series when Earl Wilson was the pitcher, and, so I wish I could say I was there for that ceremony, but I know it definitely was a special time, but at least Kaline made it to the 50th one anyways, and,
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, again, I'm thankful for at least spring training. I came in contact with him a couple of occasions, and Candy's photo was just off the charts. But, any final thoughts about Al Kaline? I think we've covered a lot. 67 years with one organization, I think, is unheard of. I really do.
Oh, yeah, it definitely is. And much like, of course, Alan Trammell, Lou Whitaker spent their entire careers in Detroit, and we look at Steve Eisenman and Nick Lidstrom of the Red Wings and Joe Schmidt of the Lions. But it's a rarity when a guy spends his entire career in one team. Detroit has been blessed with several of those type of players and legends, but it's just a sad time for this city and for this area. As you know, we are having a very, very difficult time with the virus right now. Well, there are a lot of people that are suffering in Detroit, and this couldn't have come. I hate to say this, but at a worse time. But it is what it is. Al was called to his next life, and the good Lord wanted him. So it's a tough time for Detroit right now as they're fighting this terrible virus. But the fans I know love Al, and will have great memories like you and I did. That's the most important thing that we will always remember about Mr. Tiger as we say goodbye to Al at age 85.
Yeah, you're right. The timing could not have been any worse. I don't think any time a major icon dies, the timing's ever any good. But when you compound the situation with a COVID-19 where everybody, the world has been turned upside down, it's just unreal. But anyways, folks, you're listening to 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. My name is Scott Morganroth with my co-host George Eichhorn. Like the old days when we were doing the Sports Exchange, I was telling some of my broadcast partners how you and I used to do a 6-hour broadcast. We did them on Sunday night, and it was unbelievable then, and how we've been able to do some of these shows on our own. And you know what, George, every time we have an opportunity to share a microphone to me is just unbelievable, because you and I don't think I could believe in my mind that the two of us could be as close as we are. Not only are we colleagues, but we're like brothers too. And to be able to do a tribute show to me is unbelievable. And for all you folks that are looking to follow us here at 108 Stitches Baseball Talk, along with the other broadcasts, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and wherever you can get your podcasts as well. And if you're looking to find out, you can also go to www.southfloridatribune.com, and we have a podcast section, and you can subscribe, download, and listen to the broadcast, because, the one thing we all hope that everybody can go out there and do is please be safe out there. It's our responsibility here at the network to make sure you have the best possible entertainment, especially during these difficult times, let alone when the times get better. We want to make sure that we certainly made it worth your time to give us some of your time to listen to the broadcast. So any closing thoughts, George?
No, I'd just like to thank you again for allowing me on to reminisce and to renew our friendship, of course, our longtime friendship, Scott. It's been great. I wish you much success. You're doing a great job, you and Candy and your team down there at South Florida. And so it's great, though, hearing your voice, and it's also great for us to link back to those wonderful memories we got celebrating baseball and Al Kaline here in Detroit.
Well, that and all the other great events that we've covered. I mean, I think about the Red Wings history that we have, the Pistons and the Lions and all that. But, yeah, this night goes to Al Kaline for sure. And our tribute to Al Kaline is certainly a show that I'm looking forward, that I'm glad that we were able to work on tonight. And again, you and I know the situation so well, because indeed we are Metro Detroiters. No matter where I live, whether I live in South Florida, wind up in Wisconsin, or any other part of the country, I am always a Detroiter through and through between, and I'm proud of everything we've done. So I can't thank you enough for spending the time to do this tonight, George. It's been an absolute privilege. Hopefully we can bring on another show when there's a lot more positivity involved. But in our business, sometimes you have to look at shows this way, as well as the good ones and the ones that we have to unquestionably do. And this is one of those nights where it's a somber broadcast. But a somber broadcast to me is a celebration of a broadcast. So, George, please keep me posted on everything that's going on there. And we want to thank you for being on the broadcast tonight. So on behalf of George Eichhorn, my name is Scott Morganroth. You are listening to 108 Stitches Baseball Talk, our tribute to Al Kaline. So good night, everybody, and we'll catch you the next time. Bye-bye.
Good night.